Let's prove the haters wrong. Today, we're going to address a lot of the casual takes from NBA haters, and specifically coming from somebody who really should know better. We're going to go point for point here and talk a little bit about why John Stockton has a completely wrong view of the NBA. I'm Trevor Lane. This is the Basketball Bulletin. Make sure you subscribe right here to the channel. Turn on those notifications as well. And check out the podcast feed. You can click the link in the description down below to go find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Joining me, Donnie Freeman. Donnie, there's a lot of misconceptions about the NBA that are out there right now. And I know he says a lot of kind of off the wall stuff, but I think what John Stockton says in the clip that we're going to look at in just a minute is very reflective of how people who want to talk trash about the NBA think, and it's bewildering how positively wrong it is.
I mean, is it wrong? I mean, as far as I know, if you're not somebody that's played in the NBA, you're not allowed to have an opinion on NBA stuff. So,
oh, that's right. That is the way the world works. It's why you only hear people talk politics who are politicians. You only hear people talk about food who are chefs and everything else that exists in life. That's definitely the way the world works. Let's get into this. I was so I'm upset. I haven't even hit the play button yet, and I'm upset, Donnie. That's what I'm.
By the way, quick note: Trev is so upset that he's going to pause it repeatedly. So,
I am. Be prepared for that. Be prepared for that. Here we go.
So, what do you think is happening right now? Like, is the NBA too soft?
Yeah, I'm not watching a bunch of it.
Like right there, he's not watching much of the NBA, and yet he's going to go on and hit like point for point all of the misconceptions about the NBA while saying he doesn't watch it.
Is he not watching because of these things, or is it the other way around?
He's going to say this isn't why he's not watching, but he says he says not watching it because like grandkids, and like that's fine.
Okay.
But if you're going to complain about the league, you should probably at least know what you're talking about and watch it.
Life's busy, and no, it is. I'm not sitting there saying I'm not going to watch that. Life's busy. I've got kids. I've got grandkids. They're playing sports. I'd rather watch that. So it's not a negative thing like that. However, things that I see are, I do think it's softer. You have guys that can take 20 days off. What they call it, load management. I can't. Could you imagine your dad coming home? I'm a take a few weeks of work off. Well, who's going to feed us then? You know what I'm saying?
Okay, right there, Donnie. No, players aren't going to teams and saying, I want to take 20 days off. It's the other way around. And yet that's the perception that's out there. It's that the players are the ones telling teams they want time off. 9 times out of 10, the players are asking to play, and it's the teams that are saying, no, because of the data, we think you're at a higher elevated risk for an injury, and we're going to have you not play in this game. And the NBA has pushed back against load management in recent years. They've done what they can to try to prevent it because they don't want fans buying tickets to games and then not seeing the stars out there on the floor. So they're doing what they can to try to eliminate that. But that's not coming from the players, and that's what John Stockton is echoing, and that's the negativity that's out there, and it makes NBA players look bad. I know this comes as a surprise, but basketball players, they tend to want to play basketball. Shocking, I know, but this is the bad rap that NBA players get. This idea that they just don't want to play, that they just go into their employer and say, I want a bunch of time off, and that is simply not the case.
Yeah, certainly. I do agree with that. I think that generally guys do want to play. And there are also situations that we've heard of where it all just gets mismanaged, where a player has an injury and maybe the team is forcing them back more. And then in that case, the player is like, no, this isn't how this is supposed to go. And there's some friction on that. I mean, there was pretty well documented, I believe, last summer with the friction with Kawhi and the Clippers and all that stuff, and the way that his injuries were handled. This summer, Joel Embiid, since the Luka trade, some of that stuff. Like that's a thing, and that's a piece to it. But load management, I think, is one of these things where they're looking at it like these guys are just saying, hey, we just don't want to play tonight. Like, I don't know if they're looking at it as like injury management or anything like that. They're just like, no, we just don't want to play tonight. We just need the night off, or mental health reasons, which, I mean, you could dismiss those. That's fine. People are going to feel their ways about those ones specifically. But like, I think that this can be looked at multiple different ways. I don't think these guys are just saying we need a night off. Right. I don't think that's the case. And so if that's the case, whether it's the organization pushing for load management or if it's the player or whatever their camp, otherwise, I don't know if it's exactly apples to apples. So the way he's looking at it.
Right. Exactly. And but that is the perception out there for people who are trying to take shots at the NBA, particularly people who are not, following the game closely and not really, and of all people like John Stockton, all-time great, one of the greatest point guards we've ever seen, an Olympian, won the gold medal with the Dream Team, right? I mean, he's an incredible, like, he should know better, right, than this, to assume that it's the players that are pushing for this time off. Now, he also says the game is softer, and we've talked about this as well. I think that is a mischaracterization. I don't think the game is softer now. And I grew up during the 80s. I grew up during the Showtime era, during players throwing elbows and fights and Kurt Rambis getting clotheslined and all of that kind of stuff.
Oh,
the game
brother,
is.
Here we go. We're gonna now get a whole bunch of arguments about this.
Boy! Right.
God.
Here's here's the issue, and this is what people who say the game is too soft now often don't acknowledge. And that's that you're not comparing apples to apples. Is the game physical today? Yes, it's just physical in a different way. It's not. Look, if we wanted to turn this into hockey rules and every team has an enforcer and you're gonna drop the sticks and you're gonna throw down and all that kind of stuff, like, then people would say, oh, okay, the game just got more physical. The game is extremely physical, especially when we look at the number of injuries that we're seeing, the soft tissue issues, the ligament tears, and all the other things that are happening in today's NBA. The game is extremely physical and extremely taxing, but it's because of more of a movement perspective. How often the skill level of teams has gone up. And so players defensively are having to cover way more ground. It's in the numbers. You can find it in the stats. The amount of space traveled, the speed at which players have to play with today is so much greater than it was back in the day. Go watch a game from 1995 and watch how much standing around there was on the offensive end and defensive end. Watch how much time there was. The ball goes to the wing, and then everybody else stands and watches. Now, was it physical in the post? Were there elbows being thrown? Yes. Yeah. But that's a different kind of physicality than what we have today.
Yeah, and the way that defenses were allowed to operate back then was very different, and all this other stuff. I think that's a very nuanced conversation you can have on that specific topic. Like, for me, I didn't really hit on that in my last opportunity because I didn't really see a ton of correlation between soft and load management, because I guess maybe that's just me maybe nitpicking a little bit because I look at them differently. Like, if you tell me that you think the game is soft, I would assume it's because, and I'm assuming he's going to say too many threes, this and that.
Yeah, that's coming. That's coming.
Like, that's where, like, I see it is like that type of stuff. And yeah, certainly the game doesn't have as much low post banging, things like that, like it used to, because the game is just stylistically played differently. And there were guys that were employed specifically to be goons, which I don't know if it's a bad thing if we don't have that as much anymore anyway. Like, if you're going to say there's less of that, and so that makes it less physical, and try to talk badly on the current standing of the NBA, I don't know if that's a bad thing. I don't know if it should have had that in the first place.
Oh, but there was a point where we had dudes who were employed in the NBA simply because they were just for being tall and north of 250 pounds. And like, part of that was Shaq, right? You had to have guys to throw at Shaq. That was part of it.
Yeah.
But that was the thing. And skill, I think skill matters so much more today than it did in the past.
And versatility, of course, and all that stuff. It's just because the game's evolution is different. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing that we don't have that, or we don't have guys, constantly getting thrown around this and that as much, or the way that the Pistons, the bad boy Pistons, like they are going to be like the poster child for this physical era of the NBA and all that stuff. I don't know if it's necessarily the worst thing that's not like that specifically anymore, but and players are more protected from some of those things. But yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to this, he's going to be innately very biased because he played in that era, and that's kind of the constant thing that's going to happen here when you see, and he starts listing off a lot of the changes that have changed since he's been playing.
But change isn't always negative, and it's strange that in the NBA we get stuck in this mindset. And it's not all former players. There's a lot of former players that give a lot of credit to the guys today, but there are a lot that just spend their time taking shots at the current product rather than praising the players for what they do. And I don't feel like we see this as often in other sports.
I'm really curious about, like, 20 years from now, how the current guys look at the guys that are going to be coming in and how they talk about them. Because the current guys have, until they started kind of hitting back at the old guys,
Yeah.
they had mostly been very complimentary of the older eras and
Sure.
talked about them, but the older guys keep taking shots at them. So they've been kind of shooting back lately, especially guys like Chuck and stuff like that. So I'm really curious about how this is going to look, 15, 20 years from now when some of these guys are in that seat.
20 years from now, LeBron's going to be talking trash about a dude who's in third grade right now.
I'm really curious to hear what Michael has to say, because he's going to be on the commentary. That's
because
we don't ever hear from him really about that type of stuff. Like, it's very rare.
It is. So I'm excited to see what he has to say. All right, let's continue. Let's continue on with more falsehoods here.
These guys do it, and they're supposed to be examples and the league allows it. I mean, so load management, things like that. The salaries are off the charts.
What's the problem with the salaries?
Right. Here's the thing. Like, that's the other thing is, like, people see players are making X and they immediately cry foul. And oh my God, they're making too much money to play a game. They're making that much money because they bring in that much money. It's related to what they bring in. Like, it is in the collective bargaining agreement. If they weren't bringing in more money in revenue, they would not be making more money in salaries. And we could talk about athletes and salaries across different sports and things of that nature. But this idea that, the game is worse today because the players they're just making too much money. They're making what they're bringing in. That's what it is. They are bringing that kind of value to the table.
Like a guy like LeBron is making much more money,
much less
for these organizations than he makes himself.
Absolutely.
Relative to having him on the team. I mean, there was a story when he left Cleveland the first time. I think it was like he took like a $500 million or something out of the economy just by leaving, in terms of like jobs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like I've got to go back and confirm it, but it was something stupid like that. So like I don't really see what the problem is with the salaries in relation to like what he's talking about in this. Like that is, I don't see the correlation, unless he's going to say they make so much money that now they feel like they've gotta, I don't know, protect themselves more, which means that they're more soft or things like that, leading into more load management. I think you could maybe make an argument for that. Like, there's so much money in there that they want to prolong themselves as much as possible, but I don't know that that's what he's doing here. It just sounds like he's maybe salty that he did play the right era for the
maybe that's the case. Maybe that's
the way I hear it.
Okay, let's see what else, because he's going to get into the style of play here too. And yeah,
the style of play is, these kids are talented, man. They can make shots, and because they make shots, everybody thinks they should be taking them, and so it's just throw it out. There's less strategy. There's less physicality. The safety, again, kind of back to the COVID thing. Safety is more important than the game, and I don't know. I think the game's first. I think people are looking for gladiators out.
Okay, so
what's safety?
I mean, the game is too safe today. Again, that's going back to the physicality piece. He's going to talk about that in just a second.
Is he talking about like the landing stuff? Like
the landing stuff, just the lack of contact on the perimeter, I believe. It's things like, he doesn't specifically say that, but I believe that's what he's referring to here. Now, when he talks about like guys think because they can make shots, that doesn't necessarily mean that they should.
That's a good point.
I mean, it's fair, like, just because you can't, but I can also say, like, the numbers are what the numbers are. And you could say there's too much math in the game today, and that's fine. And people want to, claim there's too much nerdery and all of that. But when you look at a player, if a player is shooting a certain percentage and they're going to be able to hit on these shots, on these threes, that's ultimately the name of the game, right? It's putting the ball in the basket and doing it in the most efficient way possible. And so it may not be as aesthetically pleasing if a team shoots 53s a game like we saw Boston do last season, that they tailed off as the season went on, but the math is what the math is. And if that's the way that you're going to get the highest amount of points, then that's the goal. Like that's what you're trying to do. Now, are there times where teams gun a little bit too much, where you'd like to see them work the ball in, where there is that nostalgia? Sure. But I mean, what is it that we're wanting? Are we wanting to see more 15-foot jumpers? Like, go back and watch games from 20 years ago, from 30 years ago, and it's not all that exciting to watch guys take 15-footers all game, every game, with the paint packed and no spacing. It's a different game today, and it is what it is.
Yeah, I think that exercise where you go back and watch some of those older games would trip up a lot of people because the game's pace is going to be much slower. It's not going to look anything like it is today. And it may not look the way you remember it, especially if you go back even further than that to certain parts, you know, even like Stockton's day and stuff like that. Cause it just doesn't translate the same way. But, you know, I think, like I said, I thought that was a good point because, I mean, just referencing Cam Thomas, because we talked about him, you know, a couple days ago. There was that stat that I threw out there where he shot on catch and shoots 44%. And then as he took like a couple dribbles, his percentage is dipped by like 25%. I mean, that's one of the situations where he can make this shot, but should he be trying to take that shot as much? You know, like, I mean, even the math is agreeing that he shouldn't be trying to take it as much. So I can understand that perspective. And some of these guys just want to be gunners and stuff like that, especially these high picks trying to develop on these bad teams, like we talked about in yesterday's video. Yeah. And so that's another situation where I can understand that. But yeah, if it's more of like a stylistic thing where, like, you know, nowadays these guys are just taking a bunch of threes, this and that, and we're more upset about that because these guys are just taking half court shots, all the Steph shots that everybody thinks they can do because they grew up watching Steph or have changed the game to their games to try to mirror what the NBA is currently because of what Steph did and all that stuff. I mean, I can't really be too mad about that, but that's just kind of the way the game is today. And I think that more so, like, you could, again, another nuanced conversation, you could shift it to the focus around like the elimination of the mid-range game, although we are in a little bit of a renaissance with like guys like Shea. I'm curious about
that's
that
because defenses are geared towards giving up that shot. And so we talked about this, that there would be a point where somebody was going to come along that was going to be hyper efficient at that shot because that's a blind spot in defenses, and that is schemed into defenses to give up that shot.
KD's been around the whole time, just like
and KD can KD can kill on that shot, right? But if you hit that shot on high, that's all it is. It's all about how can you get points in the most efficient way, right? And if that's a 15, if you're going to shoot 55% on 15 footers, then by all means take those all game, right? It's just a math equation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the game is the way it is as well right now, because for the math equation for a lot of guys, for a majority of the guys, it's threes and layups. That's it. That's what you want, because you're not going to hit that contested mid-range shot at a clip respectable enough to value it over the 3-point shooting. And then there's the added element of the ability to like have the floor spaced out better because you're not hunting that mid-range area. And so the game may just flow better for your team as a result. And so I think that shot it's been frozen out, but I think it's still extremely valuable, particularly as you get into the playoffs and you need to generate those tougher looks. And so maybe that's where, like, you know, like I said, you could have a really deep conversation on just that specifically. But in terms of like what he's saying here, like I said, I did think that was a good point. The safety bit of it, you know, and we didn't really talk about this earlier on the physicality part, but like the safety bit where they've got the landing stuff and all that stuff. And then also like the lack of hand checking. Although I will contest that if you watch an NBA game, while there's not as much hand checking, you're going to see it on a nightly basis. Happens. It still is out there. Like, it's not like it's just completely gone.
Yeah. On both ends, look at what offensive players get away with. I'm pushing off now.
Oh yeah. That's a whole other thing too. They let these guys get away with murder on the other side. But I do think that, you know, that is an argument, I think, in terms of like just the physicality side of it, is because they didn't have some of these rules. But once again, is that a good thing? Is it a good thing that the NBA back then didn't think, oh, wait, we can help try to preserve these guys' ankles and lower extremities if we instate a rule where if you step under a guy when they're pulling up and they land on you, that's on you. That's your fault. You should give them space to land. Like, is that a good thing?
Change is scary naturally to human beings. Change can be scary, but that doesn't mean it's inherently bad. And that's what we're talking about here. Like, is that actually, like, you can say, oh, the game is softer, it's not as physical. Why? Because you're not allowed to slide your foot under a guy as they're coming down. Like, are they more protective of players? Are there times now where you see players do ridiculous stuff? Yes. I go back a few years ago to the crap that James Harden was doing and Trae Young was doing, and the I mean, just did the absolute, like, embarrassing stuff for the league. But they have curtailed that. The league has responded. They have responded to that appropriately and done what they could to try to take that kind of nonsense out of the game and to, you know, walk a very fine line of having a physical game without having it overly physical. And there will always be corrections. It's like driving a car, right? There will always be little minor corrections that you're making in order to stay in that lane that you're trying to stay in. And that's what what the NBA is trying to do here. Now, when he talks about the game has less skill, less strategy to it at this point, I should say.
That's just
Strategy.
wrong.
Yeah, that's not correct. Now, do we see a lot of high pick and roll? And so, yes, we do. And so a lot of people just see it and think, oh, well, that's every team just high pick and rolls to death, and that's it. Spread the floor, high pick and roll. That's every team's strategy, and that's all they ever do. And that's just not true. And I especially think that as it's about getting as much skill on the floor as you can, and as we're getting players now of all sizes that are skilled, because for a while there, it was smaller players were on the floor more often. Teams were playing small, not because they want to be small, but because they had more skill on the floor that way. Now we're getting bigger players that are also skilled. And we're also seeing teams start to put more value, and we saw this a lot last season, into the offensive glass. Teams are really prioritizing that. So guess what? What did we see Houston do last year? Not only crush the offensive glass, but also run two centers on the floor at the same time. They ran Sengun and Steven Adams. They even did it in the playoffs. Guess what they used to do in the 80s? We used to call it the Twin Towers, right? Like, we're starting to see some of those strategies come into play. Teams are mixing things up. They're constantly looking for an edge. So when we talk about strategy lacking in today's NBA, I think that is another misunderstanding of what's actually happening on the floor. And there are people who are better X's and O's people than I am. I understand the game at I think a decently high level. There are people who will read the game in a different way and they do a great job explaining why things are happening the way they are. But the bottom line is that there is a lot more strategy in today's NBA than what meets the eye. It just takes paying enough attention to it to see it.
Yeah, and maybe that's because we don't see as many of those Princetons or triangles. A lot of those concepts are still around. They've just been adapted into a modernized style, but we don't see those core offensive styles anymore. But I will contest that, like, I do think there is a heavy element of, strategizing and stuff like that. A lot of chess playing, especially when you get into a playoff series, just like there's always been, where you're pulling and plugging in different wrinkles to your team or your rotation, etc. And then there's also just different styles of defenses that you can see today, once again, that you couldn't see so much of previously, like, boxes and ones, triangles and twos, 1-3-1s, amoebas, matchup zones, all the switching these guys do. Like, they're just, it's just way different. It's just really hard to say this is not as good because XYZ and throw it like that when it's just so much evolution in terms of the way the game is allowed to be played. And so I think ultimately, again, I just think that's wrong. And whether you want to say there's more now or anything, at least I will say it's not gone. That's my point. It's like, it's not gone. Yeah. And I mean, frankly, I think there's more, but it's not gone. Right. No. I think that's one of those things where, like, you look at it and it's just these guys are doing high pick and rolls and they're shooting 53s a game, and that's it. That's all people care about. That's all you see on the surface. And people don't care about the process of the way that you generate those threes. It may be a high pick and roll, but there's actions going on the sides, oftentimes, things like that. There may be a cutter down there you're not paying attention to. All you see is a high pick and roll, and then a kick to a corner for a three. Right. I think that the process does matter as well, even in that specific scenario.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think is getting overlooked by, and I think it sucks to say it, but I think we kind of have to put John Stockton and he admits it, into the category of a casual observer.
I mean, he's not watching, so.
No, that's just it. He admits that he's not really watching the game. Now, obviously, he comes from a much stronger background than the typical casual sports fan, and casual has become too much of a derogatory term. But when you dig deeper into this game, you see the beauty of it. And that doesn't mean that it's perfect. That doesn't mean that it can't be changed. It absolutely can be, and it will be. It will forever be a changing product, but that doesn't mean it's inherently bad. All right, let's finish off here with his final statements.
They want you to go to war, and they want to see you do what they can't do, not go out there and shake hands and hug each other and shoot jumpers, but
and take selfies.
Yeah, everybody's like so kissy and like, oh, this is my buddy. It's like, no, go out there like you're my enemy. We're going to war.
We had teammates that were on another team the next year, and literally you wouldn't even look them in the eye back in the day. You just, okay, let's go.
Yeah, I love it. That's how we used to play.
Exactly. Do those things have to be mutually exclusive? Like, you can't say that oh, I grew up with this guy, because that's a lot of it too today is the AAU culture and all that stuff. You can't be friends with somebody but also still want to kill them out there.
Man, when I mean, and I never played at a super high level or anything, but I always wanted to play against my friends so I could kick their ass, right? Like I wanted that, and sometimes I won, sometimes I didn't. But you always wanted that challenge of playing against your buddies. I always played harder when I was playing against friends, but that's not. I think that's one area of all these different things that we have essentially dissected of what John Stockton has said here. That's one area where I can agree with him in that there's a disconnect, because what fans are, I mean, look at the root of the word fan. It's fanatic, right? What fans are, they love their team or they love a specific player. We see that. We see a lot more player first fandom now. And what you want is there to be a connection between the fans and the players and the teams. They want the same thing. And fans are going to have this venom towards other teams. Fans are going to have this venom towards other players. They're going to develop this emotional rivalry, this connection, right? And that's what you want, because that creates buy-in. And so there is a little bit of a disconnect when fans are, oh man, we hate the Celtics or whatever, and then you hear these guys are friends and they're laughing and talking and stuff like that on the court. That's where there's a disconnect with fans. However, I also think there is a very strong counter argument to all of that. When we look at today's NBA, do we see players sticking with one team for their entire career? No, not nearly as often as we used to. So is there as much inherent loyalty to a specific team for players? Probably not. And that's, I think it's a complaint that some fans have about today's NBA, but it's also a factor when we're looking at shorter term contracts. We're looking at players who are moving teams more. They don't develop that inherent loyalty towards a specific team, and therefore they may not feel a certain kind of way about that team's historic rival, maybe not the same way that the fans do. But ultimately, I do agree with John Stockton that maybe there is a little too much buddy stuff, where you want to see teams really go at each other, really compete and want to win. And I don't think teams don't want to win, but fans want to feel that the team has that kind of passion, that kind of desire to beat their hated rival that they do.
Yeah, and I can understand that, of course, from that perspective of, like, you know, fans want to see the animosity. They want to feel the animosity. They don't want to feel like, oh, at the end of the day, we're just playing, you know, we're friends after all that stuff. That's one of the things where, like I said, I think that just this era, they all are friends. They all grew up together. It's not that there's not any, you know, hatred. I'm sure there is some of that, but, you know, there's a lot of AAU and all that stuff. And you'll see it oftentimes. And this is one of the things where, like, LeBron specifically, because he's the face of the NBA, gets talked about. People hate it when at the end of the game, he's just smiling, like he's just living life. People hate it. They hate to see it, because, especially for him, because they're going to hold him to a higher standard. Oh, Kobe, MJ, they're pissed off at the end of it, but LeBron's over here smiling or cracking jokes. Like, people hate it. And I can understand it, again, from that perspective, especially for him, because he's held to such a high standard. But I think overall, I think for a lot of these guys, that doesn't mean that they can't go out there and put their best foot forward. It can look different. It doesn't have to look, you know, all pissed off, stoic faced, all that stuff all the time. It can look different, I do think. And I think there's room for that. So this is just one of those where it's like, I don't think anybody is right or wrong on this. It's just a what your preference is thing. Because maybe you just respect Kobe for always looking like he wanted to just snatch somebody's throat out. And that's awesome. I can completely understand that. But I don't use that against anybody else, right? Because some of the other guys are just the exact opposite. It's a personalities thing for these guys and for the people that watch these guys.
Can you be friends with somebody and still try to take their soul on the court?
I mean, Kobe back there. Remember how he trucked?
Exactly.
Remember how he trucked Powell in the Olympics?
Yes.
Like, he said, "I'm gonna go out there." That's his teammate, dude.
Do you think there's a lot of guys that are not playing hard because they're friends with the player across from them?
Absolutely not. I'm sure they want to. I'm sure they want to go out there and play as hard as possible and show their guy up. Like, especially if you're guarding me, I'm gonna drop this on you and I'm gonna talk shit to you all game long, man. I'm sure that there's a lot of that. Just because they're buddy doesn't mean that they're not competing. That's where I don't personally agree with it, but I can understand for sure why people don't like it. I can get that, but I don't know if I would use that as a point to, like, knock the current landscape, but I'm sure that we've already talked, and I've thrown out points like this throughout this video, and a bunch of old heads in the comments have already been pissed off at me. So that's just how I feel personally, right? I don't think anybody's right or wrong. So
yeah, I think there's points to be made on both sides, and there is an element of salesmanship here, right? Where when you look at a fight, look at a boxing match, look at an MMA fight, it tends to draw more when you think, oh my God, these guys really hate each other and they're selling the fight. They may not actually hate sometimes they do, but they may not actually hate each other that much. After the fight, suddenly they're hugging and stuff like that. And you're like, wait, you just said you wanted to straight up just pound this guy, that you wanted to beat him into a bloody pulp, and now you're friends with them? How is that? Well, because they were selling the fight, they were dramatizing it. So that there's that element of it too, where going into a game, if two teams really don't like each other, that's going to add to the intrigue and that's going to add to the viewership. So maybe there's that side of it too. But we also live in a more interconnected world than ever before. You have a chance to get to know people to a different degree than what you would have years ago. So there's that as well. And all of this gets wrapped up into it. But I ultimately understand both sides of that specific argument. But still, I watched this interview and I was shocked at how many things Stockton just parroted that are anti-NBA talking points. People who are trying to say negative things about the league and complain about the league and the way the league is now. He really just echoed a lot of those sentiments, while, in my opinion, missing the main point on a lot of them, or not including the proper context and just about anything. I'm like, man, I'm watching this interview with an NBA legend, and I think almost everything he's saying is wrong. And that was startling.
Yeah, it's just like barbershop talk. He's just saying all the casual, typical stuff, that you would hear. And if I were to approach this, I would have to sit down and think about what I think is quote unquote wrong with the NBA, but it would look very different from this. I think it would be some stuff like availability, for example, like how it's going to happen today, where you're going to look at the schedule and be like, oh, we got to go to 10 different subscription services just to watch basketball.
Yes.
What happened to the game I love, right? Like, I would complain about stuff like that.
There's so much of that we could do a whole show. Maybe we will here, because it's August, do a whole show about what's wrong with the NBA. We could talk about it. But Donnie, the truth is, there will always be something wrong with the NBA. There will always be. And that's true of every sports league, because it is a living thing, a constantly changing thing. There will always be things to improve upon.
Yeah. But what I will say is, just don't meet your idols, because in this case, I just want to give you guys a quick rundown. I was super enthused to meet Trev. Has not been a great experience.
No, now you're let down.
I learned who he was, and he was cussing and stuff, and I just was man, who the hell is this guy?
You know what it is I like to, I set the bar too high. What I got to do is I got to knock that down, right? So that I have to lower the expectations. That way it's an easier bar to clear. That way it's more of a surprise. On the rare occasion when I do, people are like, whoa, that's great. You know what I mean? Rather than expecting things. It's essentially under promise and over deliver. That's what I'm trying to do here. That's
crazy. That's crazy. I'm done.
All right, everybody, give us your thoughts in the comments down below. I'm sure you have plenty to say about this one and these different talking points that Stockton brought up and our responses to them. But give us your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until next time, see ya and stay safe.